Сайн байцгаана уу хүнд үзэгчтэй. Өнөөдөр манай де факто нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Эдийн засгийн профессор доктор Lingle оролцож байна.
Кристофер Лингл. Профессор Лингл нь 1977 онд Жоржиагийн их сургуульд докторийн зэрэгээ эдийн засгийн чиглэлээр хамгаалсан. Түүнээс хойш Африк, Ази, Европ, Латин Америкийн их сургуулиудад ажиллаж иржээ. Одоогоор Гватемал, Сидней, Шиндэл, Брюссел ба Непал дахь их сургуулиудын профессор ба эрдэмтэн хүн юм.
Good evening, sir. Welcome to Mongolia.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
You have been talking and giving lecture to several Mongolian audiences. So what is so far you find the economic thinking state of these people, obviously you have met so far. How do you find them? How much we are in fog? Are we out? Do we have clean sky? Do we have clear vision? What's your thought?
Well, I've met quite a few people with very clear ideas about economics. And what I would mean by that is that they begin with an understanding of the rule of law as the basis of a market economy, and the market economy as the basis for prosperity and the promotion of human liberty. I've met many people that have those ideas, but I've also met people who have these retrograde ideas where they are more sympathetic to large government, which always dehumanizes the population. So you're doing wonderful work, and I hope you will have great success in bringing the ideas of human liberty and individual dignity to Mongolia.
The importance of your visits, lectures to these young people, is because they are half of the population, under 35 years old, okay? And these people don't know anything about centrally planned economy, our socialist background. So that gives me hope that with this sort of knowledge vision, that they will have more power in their life. That's why I'm so happy to see you giving this lecture. Please tell us about why the market economy is the basis of the normal economic prosperity, and why it should be based on the rule of law.
Well, the market economy is the only moral system that man has invented. It's moral in the sense that it is based upon voluntary exchange, which is perhaps the only objective measure of justice. That when I trade with you peacefully and voluntarily, I engage in a cooperative exchange of some good or maybe an idea, like a book. And this outcome is a moral outcome in the sense that both of the trading partners are made better off in the process. So the market process itself is also civilizing. It civilizes people in the sense that it encourages people to negotiate, to compromise, to embrace strangers as friends, and to, in doing so, enrich one another through the exchange of ideas sometimes, but also the exchange of material goods and services.
So ideally, once it's voluntarily exchange of our goods, our values we have created individually, why do we need rule of law then? It's just voluntarily, you and me agree. Why, when this rule of law, which is fundamentals of course, is coming?
Well, in a way, the rule of law is a discovery of some basic conditions that humanity discovered through time that would support this expansion of human liberty and individual dignity. And the rule of law then, as you certainly know, but I'll remind your listeners, the rule of law has some very simple precepts. First, that we honor other people's private property, and that we use the law to help with the enforcement of contracts so that people behave honestly. And number 3, that we restrain aggression and violence. So we all benefit from this. If I respect your property, then this mutual advantage is that all of us respect one another's private property. And if we enforce contracts, then that encourages people to be honest and creates penalties if they're not. And to prevent violence and aggression means that we can live more peacefully and the human condition can flourish, the human condition can progress. And then the overriding aspect of the rule of law is that there are no privileges for any person or group, that the president of the country has no more privileges than the common citizen. The richest man has no more privileges than the common man. And this is a very important thing that's very often difficult to communicate to people who have lived through a socialist system where you feared the people with power and maybe in some way you respected them because you had to. And so that elevates sometimes political leaders when they should not be. No political leader is worth more to a country than the common citizen.
Remember the Animal Farm? So when Orwell wrote about the book 1994, we passed that deadline now. It's already another 30 or 20 or so more years. So the humankind came to the conclusion, it is the end of the socialist area now. And now we are more understanding, and in particular in this country, for the last 27 years, more or less understands that market economy at least have all these goods we have in the country today, the options, houses, cars. Of course, not everybody can afford, but none of them was there before. It was equally same, very bad looking, all stuff. But now, understanding that, yet still people who believes that it should be the state who is responsible for their good living. Why is that staying that long?
Well, it's interesting. The great enemy of human liberty is no longer socialism. The experiments we had with socialism created a very strong evidence of the failures of central planning and state control and ownership of resources and the productive sector of the economy. But now the great enemy of human liberty has become populism. And democracy, unfortunately, has become a mechanism not to promote human liberty, but to promote these populist arrangements so that politicians, through using state revenues, can win elections. And this is the real great danger, and it's more subtle. It's not as obvious. I mean, almost every politician rejects state ownership.
See, this is the point. Now we talk about the role of state. The role, once you have the power of the state, you can manipulate, you can arrange so that they are making consideration for your own property that you have created, and suddenly somebody through this one is coming, arranging how much you should use your property, which you should give to others, etc. So, in capitalism, which is a market economic democracy, we transfer this political power, state power, to political parties. There's no other way.
No.
I mean, why is that? Cannot we change these institutions? Or, I mean, if it is a matter of only that institutions, what can we do? Or should we change that itself, or inside or outside? What is your thought?
It's a real difficult problem. As you may know, Winston Churchill once said that democracy is the worst political system, except for all the others. So it has problems, it has faults, and the market also is imperfect. But what we find is that when politics determines life outcomes, the decisions are arbitrary. They're based upon a temporary majority, but the legislation or regulations that come from that tend to be permanent, and they're very inflexible and unlikely to change. So if politicians make a mistake, we live with it perhaps forever. In the market, if we make mistakes in the market, there are incentives for us to make adjustments quickly so that we don't live with these mistakes forever. And they don't affect so many people because normally market decisions are based upon individual choices. It might affect the family, maybe the extended family, but when politicians make decisions, they affect the entire country. When politicians make mistakes, it affects the entire country. When individuals make mistakes in the market, it's isolated. And again, you have a much stronger incentive to correct those mistakes.
See, in a post-communist country like Mongolia, many other countries are doing those so-called transitions from centrally planned economy to market economy. But on the way, in particular this country, they suddenly keep increasing state-owned enterprises, in particular mining sector, where we have main sources. But somehow all these state-owned enterprises are running with the loss and having a big asset, making government a lot rich, yet they have a loss. And these people are paying through taxes these losses. So now question is, how come those political, now you said the political parties, we cannot avoid it because it's democracy.
Yeah.
But our political parties are non-transparent.
Yeah.
We don't know where the money comes, how they spend. What can we do? What is the best practices?
Well, you know, the great experiments with democracy began with the idea of constitutionalism. Constitutionalism was about defining very precise obligations of the government and also defining very precise restraints and restrictions on what governments can do. Unfortunately, these are only pieces of paper, and they're expressions of ideas. If these ideas and values are not shared by the population, then your country is exposed to the dangers of populism.
Like in Venezuela today.
Like in Venezuela, the disasters of Venezuela. It's a democracy, but they created a dictator through the democratic process.
But yet these ideas, though people at first, you see, they like it, they support it. But however, with that idea of this constitution, still people vote for these politicians.
Exactly.
Still these politicians promising everything, as you said, populist. And why? What is wrong with these people's knowledge? Or so what's wrong with that? How come that people can be altogether not very smart?
I think in a way it can be explained by a moral confusion. Many people think that the state should protect the weak, the poor, the elderly. But in fact, that should be an individual responsibility. In the sense that the people that suggest that the state should do these things pretend that it's a moral argument, that you demand that governments tax people and redistribute income. But in fact, there's no morality in state action. The only morality is in individual action. If you individually believe that the poor, the sick, the elderly need assistance, then it's up to you to fulfill your personal moral obligation. But for you to use the state as an instrument to pursue whatever you believe is the right thing requires that compulsion and coercion be used against one group to take away resources that they've produced peacefully and honestly to give to some other.
That's what they
individual.
keep doing.
Yeah.
This government, for example, have distributed money, 160 almost billion tugriks, it's equivalent of, say, almost 80 or so, 70 million US dollar, which is a part of the IMF first tranche, twice more money within 36 hours before the presidential elections result.
Yeah.
So including the day of election. And that's a great example of how the state is using everybody's money for gaining political advantage for one candidate, right? And yet people understand that. but still keep going and voting. And so my question is, how much, at which level of economy people will be more independent? Now it's about, say, $4,000 per capita. 20 years ago it was on 10 times less. Now we're doing a marvelous job in that sense. But 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 per capita level USD is something that any variables, any correlations?
No, I think it's hard to explain in a way, because we find other countries like Argentina in Latin America that had a high per capita income, but they gave in to populism. And what usually happens is that politicians behave dishonestly and use crises as an excuse to expand government power. And people feeling insecure in the middle of a security crisis like 9/11 in the US or an economic crisis will often say, okay, let's give the government more power to protect us, because, and it's often not thought through. It's just a reaction of the moment. And then there may be regrets later. But what happens is, once you give up this power to the state, they almost never give it up. They never give it back. So more power to the state, less freedom for the citizens.
How to stop it?
Yeah, that's very difficult. And it's people like you trying to communicate the moral basis of these ideas of promoting the rule of law, especially. Unless we fully understand the rule of law and incorporate that in our understanding of the relationship between governments and citizens, then we find ourselves drifting into this dangerous populist swamp.
The problem is, the question I'm asking, even with over $50,000 per capita income like a country, the US, still populism is gaining ground.
Exactly.
And so it is exactly not depending on that level. So,
but it was based upon crises. The last crisis, well, 9/11 encouraged the state to increase surveillance and anti-terrorist activities. So this, more power, more resources. And people happily gave that.
yeah.
Then there was the housing crisis of 2007. And then people said, oh, we need the government. The market failed because they didn't really understand the underlying cause of the financial crisis in the U.S.
It was again the government.
It was government policy, but primarily central bank policy.
Yes, and they were supporting on a body that is already dead.
Yeah.
Somehow
Yeah.
keep it bang, and then at the end,
Yeah.
the gun. This body is gone anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
That gives me a thought about our central bank policy today. Please tell the people that central bank is giving 5 to 8% so-called mortgage loan when the market rate about 20%.
Yeah.
And this makes the country, the government in particular, who is at the end paying, into more debt. And they came to the level that issued domestic bond, which is more than the banking interest rate, which is over 20%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how does the mechanism work that, because the money is not growing, the money is money,
Yeah.
and the risk of 8% to 20%, this 12% difference, the economy, the people have somehow through all these triggering points. How do you consider this sort of central bank policy?
Well, central bank.
It is not unique, Mongolia
Yeah,
also.
exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, central banks around the world are the primary source of economic and financial instability. They are the biggest problem. Now, it helps to understand why central banks were invented. Central banks were invented by kings and emperors to promote imperialism and to finance wars. And in a way, that's what's happening still. The market did not develop the idea of a central bank. It was developed by what we could call politicians, that is, the political power. Now, what happens then is that central banks primary purpose is to finance governments and to support government policy, good or bad. And in suppressing interest rates, this provides the opportunity for governments to borrow beyond the possibility of repaying their debts. So consider Greece. What happened with Greece? Every government expects to roll over or extend the loans. They never expect to repay them totally. They simply would renegotiate at the end of the term new conditions or to expand how much they owe. But at a point, government debt reaches a limit, and that limit is primarily the government's ability to generate enough tax revenue to be able to repay the interest on the existing loans. Now, what happened in Greece a couple of years ago was that people finally realized the Greek government will never be able to generate enough tax revenue based upon the private sector economy, so that they refused to roll over the debt. And what happens?
It was not possible anymore to continue.
Yeah.
So the similar extent happening here.
Yeah,
now,
exactly what happening here.
Mongolian government, exactly like Greece government, if not worse now, in a situation we cannot pay in the normal course of the things today. So what happened? They go out and ask for money from IMF.
Yeah.
IMF comes, not only alone, but with other loan agencies coming. They are coming with a loan package of 60% of our economy at once. Yeah. And all of them is a loan. Nobody is giving you free.
No.
So now we suddenly receive, not to pay a certain bunch of, they say, if we don't receive, if we don't receive now, we cannot pay this debt. How come?
Well,
how come? How does it work?
Yeah. Well, government officials do not live with the consequences of their actions. The next generation of politicians live with the consequences of their actions. So what happens is that democracy creates incentives for politicians to do the wrong thing. Unless there are constitutional restraints, or unless the citizens are engaged in understanding that we must restrain the expansion of the role of government, then they will misbehave in this way, and they will always seek higher borrowing. And of course, what's happened with the IMF, the IMF always comes in with the proposal that you must increase taxes. This is crazy. As you increase the burden of taxation on the private sector, it will restrict the possibility of high rates of growth that will generate the high revenues needed to pay the interest. So it's an impossibility. You raise the tax rate, the government's taking up a bigger section of the total economy, the private economy is shrinking relative to the government sector, and it's unable to grow rapidly enough to provide the insatiable appetite for debt.
This country is now at that situation. Now people are running away from the private sector.
Yeah.
People by all means try to be with the public sector.
Yeah.
And they keep, because they're spending a lot of money, not only our money, but other countries' money, which is cheaper relatively because the economic size, etc. And now people more interested to work for public. So in that circumstances, what is the best way to restore our value that will move us ahead?
Well, I know it sounds difficult to accept, but I would have accepted that the government go bankrupt in a clean way. That would have at least sent an obvious signal. It would have brought it to an end, number one. You wouldn't have accumulated more debt to international agencies. And it would have made clear to the population of the failures of previous government officials to secure their future. This would have been a shock. And you've recovered from shocks before. And I think this would have been a useful shock that would have helped people begin to understand government is doing too much. Government is taking too much.
Having in a situation where government cannot pay any more their expenses, salaries of public officers, then this is the bankruptcy, right?
Yeah.
This government has to declare, if there's any government that had
Yeah.
done that in the world,
Yeah.
who? Which government?
Well, many countries have done it. Argentina has done it several times. Russia had problems with its debt.
So we call it in the economic terms default.
Yeah, sovereign default.
Uh-huh.
So, and as I say, I think this would send a very strong signal to the population that this kind of behavior leads to disaster. Now, the IMF simply extended the collapse to the future. It didn't solve the problem. The problem is there. The government is overspending, and they're not going to change their spending habits. But what they want to do, and they will always try to do, is raise the tax rates or increase or create new taxes or expand the tax base.
Very clear example, so-called Genghis Khan bond, and I don't understand why we borrow so much and we call this paper like with such a great name. But this is one of the misconceptions of our politicians. So what happened? Genghis bond, 1 million. One is a $500 million US dollar. The other is $1 billion US dollar.
Yeah.
And that rate, interest rate, was in the range of less than about 5.5%.
I
for
thought it
10
was
years.
higher, but yeah, it
But now what is happening? When the 5 years bond is finished, they had to pay.
Yeah.
They have issued another loan
yeah.
for 7 years term, not 5 years. Now interest rate is around 8.5%.
8%. Okay, that's
So this is the cost of our bond today.
Yeah.
And the more we are into debt, this cost will be more increasing. So at a certain point, now we are running with the time to explain to people that now we are running into the hell.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And they are. And the drivers are the irresponsible politicians that make commitments that they cannot meet.
so what would be the role of economists, normal economists in the country?
Well, it should be that they give better advice but in fact, government officials would never hire an economist like you or me, because we would be telling them, spend less, lower taxes, reduce regulation. We need to restrain your ability to expand political power. What politician would listen to that advice?
That's why we have no jobs with the government, which
So
is good.
this is why we need to reach the citizens of Mongolia, so they begin to demand that.
So now we talk about then a civic society, informed part of the citizens. And with this knowledge you and me are discussing, if these people have this open and straight discussions on these values, that will be better for people to understand more and to oppose.
Exactly.
But however, on the other side, because it's former socialist country, many people have mentality that the government is doing not enough. We have completely bankrupt social system.
Yeah.
Social insurance system bankrupt. They are like surviving on the injections.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't know how to stop all this, but we keep going to that direction.
Yeah.
So what would be your advice for civic society?
Well, again, I think instructing people on the importance of the rule of law. This to me is the really important thing. And when people begin to understand the elements of the rule of law, then they would say, well, these government policies of paying high pensions to government employees, it's got nothing to do with the rule of law.
There is a private insurance system, social insurance system.
Yeah.
I mean, along with the government one, I can pay to private companies more money, which gives me more guarantee than the government, with more interest rates, maybe over than inflation rates.
Yeah.
After 10 years, I will have more. I feel now more confident if I have more private pension fund.
Yeah.
Where is the good cases and how we can do that?
You know, that's a good, I was not aware of that, but I'm happy to see that there's at least a parallel arrangement between private pensions.
Occasional
but
start
beware,
is there.
But beware. These same sorts of arrangements have existed in other countries. When governments got into problem with debt, they simply nationalized the private pension funds. So this happened in Argentina recently. It's happened in other countries that I know of. So this is a great danger. And you may start worrying about this now because there's so much difficulty in the government meeting its debt obligations that they're going to look for any way possible to satisfy that.
Now a little bit, another aspect of our development, which is education. How do you see the role of education? What must be the role of state here? Should it be less? If it is any, what kind of works the government should do?
Well, I think the government should not be involved in education or in food production. They're both things that people have a desire for. We know very clearly that people will pay for private education. And we could look at countries like India, where even the very poor people, the desperately poor in India, go to what we call budget private schools. I'm not speaking of the international school here where even I couldn't afford to pay for that. But in India, they have what we call budget private schools.
Okay.
And even though the government provides free schooling, they choose to send them to private schools because the private schools actually educate their children. So what happens in India, because they're government employees, the teachers don't come to school to teach. Even the headmasters do not come to oversee the schools. So the students, these very poor students going to these government schools in the poor areas, they have no possibility of learning. So the parents have to use their own resources to send them to private schools, and it's very successful. So first of all, the private sector public sector does not need to be involved. In any case, education for me is neither necessary nor sufficient for success. Bill Gates has no university degree.
But I'm talking about the primary school.
Yeah, okay.
Literacy.
Okay, well, but I'm just saying that, giving you an example, that Li Ka-shing never went to school. He was the richest man in Hong Kong. He never went to primary school. What people need is formal training, or informal training sometimes on the job. And I think one economic reality that people need to understand is first you need economic growth, and then you can afford education. If you try to put education before economic growth, you wind up like in Cuba. In Cuba, they have very high literacy rates. Everyone has a degree, but there are no jobs. They tried to put education first, and they are very proud of this. But what about those people who have MBAs, master's degrees, PhD, or there are just no jobs for them?
That's
because
what
resources have been wasted in the public sector.
Now people in Mongolia who has education, particular a lot doctors, medical doctors, teachers, and a lot humanitarian disciplines.
Yeah.
These people having diploma, in certain cases even some postgraduate degrees, now flocking to South Korea. We have 36,000 people working there. And every month 10,000 people apply for visa. So this is in a way big index of what exactly happening in all those terms you and me talked in this country. So, all right, Chris, final questions about you. I mean, you are working a lot of years in this academic circle. You are professor of many universities. You lived in Asia extensively. Now you are giving lecture in many countries. Do you believe that a country like Mongolia will be successful?
I hope so. And Mongolia faces political struggles that are more threatening than the economic struggles. Every country is in that situation today. We have to somehow solve this problem of restraining the expansion of the role of the state. Then you'll have economic success, the way you did in the immediate post-communist period. And there's no reason for me to doubt that. The Mongolian people I've met are remarkably adaptive. They are being nomadic people. I think it's part of your DNA that you're open, you're adapting new things, you're responsive to changing conditions. And this is what generates economic progress, the entrepreneurial spirit. This exists here in a very deep and impressive way. But what's holding you back are the political arrangements. Unleash the people of Mongolia, and the future Mongolia will be very bright. And
that's exactly what I'm trying to do, unleashing the people.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Great pleasure.
За хүн үзэгчдээ өнөөдөр манай de facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор алдартай эдийн засагч Кристофер Лингл оролцлоо. Их баярлалаа.